It all started with a simple grocery list. My name is Greg. I'm a 38-year-old accountant with a pretty standard routine. I wake up early, work long hours at a desk, and come home to a warm dinner made by my wife, Emma. Life with Emma has always been predictable, which I've never minded. I'm the kind of person who likes things stable, orderly, and without too many surprises. That's why, when I picked up the grocery list from the counter one morning, I didn't think much of it at first. Emma usually writes down the items we need when I get home after work. It's a small task she handles, and I don't mind doing the shopping. I've never been the one to care about what goes on the list. But that day something felt off. It was just a small thing, but enough to stir my curiosity. The list was handwritten as usual, but there was one glaring detail that caught my attention. There were several items that I knew for a fact Emma and I had never purchased before. Strange considering we've been married for 5 years, and our grocery habits have remained pretty consistent. But this list, it included things that didn't make sense. First, there were 2 jars of a brand of mustard that I absolutely despised. I couldn't even look at it without feeling disgusted. Emma knew this. She'd never even bring it up in conversation, let alone buy it. Then there was a large packet of dried figs. Figs? I had never seen her buy those. I didn't even know if she liked them. And to top it off, there was a pack of vegetarian frozen meals, a brand I had never heard of before. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the list for a few seconds longer than I probably should have. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe Emma had bought these things for a reason that I hadn't understood yet. I thought of asking her about it when she came home from work, but something stopped me, a strange, nagging feeling at the back of my mind. That night, as Emma came through the door, she kissed me on the cheek and dropped her purse on the table. "How was your day?" she asked, clearly in a good mood. Same old," I replied, my voice casual, though my thoughts were far from it. "Hey, I noticed something on the grocery list today." She raised an eyebrow, a slight smile on her lips. "What about it?" I hesitated, trying to find a way to ask without sounding accusatory or overly suspicious. There were some items I didn't recognize, like mustard. "You know I don't like that stuff." Her expression faltered for a moment, just long enough for me to notice. But she recovered quickly, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, that's for Sarah. She's coming over tomorrow. She loves that kind of mustard. You know she's been trying to eat healthier lately, so I thought I'd grab a few things for her." Sarah, that name again, Emma's friend. She had mentioned her before, but I never really paid attention. I knew Sarah was a coworker of hers, but I didn't think much of their relationship. They had lunch sometimes, and occasionally Emma would mention going shopping with Sarah or meeting her for coffee. Nothing out of the ordinary. But now something about Sarah didn't sit right with me. The mustard, the figs, the frozen vegetarian meals, it all felt planned. I swallowed my unease, trying to convince myself I was just overthinking it. "Right, okay, I didn't realize you two were that close." Emma smiled, giving me a reassuring look as she walked to the kitchen. "You know how Sarah is. She's always trying something new, always with the healthy stuff." I tried to brush off the odd feeling in my stomach, but I couldn't ignore it. Why hadn't I ever heard about Sarah's specific taste before? Why hadn't Emma mentioned that Sarah liked mustard, or figs, or frozen meals? I thought back to all the times Emma had cooked dinner. Never had she made anything like that, and never had I heard her mention Sarah eating like that. It seemed strange, almost like Emma was hiding something. As I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind began to wander. I'd been married to Emma for 5 years, and we'd shared nearly everything. But now there were pieces to the puzzle I didn't understand. I tried to shake off the feeling of paranoia, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something wasn't adding up. That night after dinner, I decided to go to the grocery store myself. I grabbed my jacket, shoved my hands into the pockets, and left without saying much to Emma. It wasn't a big deal. I just needed to grab a few things for myself. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the grocery list, those strange items, had opened a door to something I wasn't ready to face. The grocery store was as mundane as I expected it to be. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow over the aisles, and the familiar hum of shopping carts clinking along the floor provided an oddly calming soundtrack to my racing thoughts. I wandered through the aisles, picking up items I'd need, some bread, milk, a few snacks. But as I passed by the condiment aisle, my mind kept drifting back to the list Emma had left for me. The mustard, the figs, the frozen vegetarian meals. I couldn't stop thinking about them. It wasn't that I cared about mustard or figs or even frozen meals. What bothered me was the fact that they were things I knew Emma didn't care for, things she had never once mentioned in the 5 years we'd been together. And now here I was, trying to piece it all together, trying to understand what was going on. I rounded the corner of the aisle and found myself face to face with the exact brand of mustard from the list. The bright yellow jar stood out on the shelf, almost taunting me. I picked it up, running my fingers over the label, feeling the cool glass beneath my touch. This was the same mustard I had refused to buy ever since we'd started living together. I hated it, and yet there it was. One of the items I had specifically seen on that list. I set it back on the shelf, a little too forcefully, and walked away. My eyes scanned the shelves for the next item. Dried figs. Sure enough, just a few aisles over, I found a selection of dried fruits, and there, nestled between apricots and raisins, were the figs. I grabbed the packet, running my thumb along the soft, wrinkled surface of the bag. I couldn't remember Emma ever mentioning figs. I had never seen her buy them before, and I couldn't understand why she would now. At this point, I was starting to feel a little sick, like I was chasing ghosts, digging deeper into something that didn't need to be dug into. But the nagging feeling in my stomach wouldn't let me stop. I kept walking through the aisles, my thoughts running a mile a minute, until I finally reached the frozen food section. There they were, the vegetarian frozen meals, the same brand, the same packaging, just like the ones on the list. I stared at them for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. I didn't recall Emma ever buying frozen meals, especially ones meant for vegetarians. We weren't vegetarians. In fact, I knew Emma loved her steak, her chicken. She never hesitated to order a burger when we went out to eat. Why would she buy frozen meals like this for someone else? I stood frozen for a moment, feeling a strange mixture of confusion and dread settle in my chest. It was like I was being led down a path, one where I didn't want to go, but couldn't stop myself from following. The dots weren't connecting, and it was driving me insane. I paid for my items quickly, the bags heavy in my hands, my mind still swirling with questions. As I left the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just on the edge of discovering something I wasn't ready to face. What was Emma hiding? Who was this Sarah? And why hadn't I seen the signs before? I decided not to go straight home. I couldn't face her yet, not until I had more answers. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what all of this meant. So I drove around for a while, the engine of my car humming quietly beneath me as I let my mind unravel. The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. Emma had never mentioned any of this before. Why now? And why would she be doing all of this behind my back? As I drove, I found myself heading toward a park near our house. It was a small, quiet place where we used to go when we first met. It wasn't much, just a patch of green grass with a few benches, but it had always been a place where we could sit and talk about anything. I parked the car and sat there for a while, letting the evening air calm my nerves. The peaceful surroundings only made the swirling thoughts in my mind more oppressive. I couldn't shake the image of Emma's face from earlier when she had explained the grocery list. Her smile had been so casual, so natural, but her eyes, there was something there, something I couldn't put my finger on. She had seemed a little too comfortable with the idea of buying these things for Sarah, as if it was nothing out of the ordinary. When I got home, the house was quiet. Emma's car was in the driveway, but the lights were off inside. I unlocked the door and stepped in, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of her. The living room was empty. I could hear the faint sound of water running in the kitchen. I took a deep breath and walked toward the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I was ready for something to break, to finally understand what had been happening. Emma was standing at the sink, washing dishes. She didn't seem surprised when I walked in. "Hey, you're home early," she said, her voice light, as if nothing was wrong. "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "I grabbed a few things from the store." Her eyes flickered briefly to the bags I was holding, and she smiled. "Oh, what did you get?" I set the bags down on the counter and glanced at her. My heart felt heavy, the words bubbling up in my throat. "I saw the list," I said, my voice firm but shaky. "The mustard, the figs, the frozen meals. What's going on, Emma?" She froze for a moment, her hand still holding a dish under the running water. And then, without turning to face me, she said quietly, "It's for Sarah, Greg." I stared at her back, waiting for her to explain further, but the words never came. Emma's voice was calm, but there was something in it, something I couldn't place, that made my stomach churn. "It's for Sarah, Greg." I stood there, frozen. She had barely turned around to face me, her attention still on the dish in her hand, as if the conversation we were having was nothing more than an everyday exchange, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. At least in my mind it had. "You're still buying those things for her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out sharper than I intended. "The mustard, the figs, the frozen meals? Why have you never mentioned it before?" Emma turned slightly, finally facing me. She looked tired, but that was normal. We both worked long hours. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment I thought I saw something shift, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I told you," she said again, her voice soft but insistent. "It's for Sarah. She loves those things. She's been having a rough time lately, Greg. She's trying to eat better, trying new things." I couldn't stop myself. "How come I've never heard about Sarah's new tastes before? Why didn't you tell me? Why is it only now, after 5 years, that I'm just finding out about her obsession with mustard and figs?" Emma sighed, setting the dish down and wiping her hands on a towel. "It's not a big deal, Greg. Why are you making it one?" She was trying to calm me down, her tone patient, as if she were talking to a child who didn't understand. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I couldn't help it. The pieces weren't fitting. The mustard, the figs, the frozen meals. Why hadn't she ever mentioned them before, if they were such a regular part of her friend's life? And why had Emma been so calm, so nonchalant, as if I was the one overreacting? "I'm not making a big deal out of it, Emma," I said, my voice low now, trying to keep my frustration under control. "But you've never mentioned this friend of yours before. You never told me about Sarah's habits. I don't know anything about her. And now you're buying all this stuff for her, and I just don't get it." Emma's eyes softened, and she stepped toward me, placing a hand on my arm. "Greg, you're overthinking it. Sarah's just a friend. She's been through a lot lately, and I wanted to help her out. It's nothing to get worked up about." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she was letting on. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something, teetering between disbelief and an overwhelming, gnawing suspicion. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I didn't. "Why did you lie about the grocery list?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air, its weight heavier than I intended. Emma froze, her hand still resting on my arm. "What do you mean?" "You told me it was for Sarah, but when I looked at the list, it was all for her. None of it was for us. And I didn't hear you mention her once when we talked about shopping. It felt like you were keeping something from me. You never mentioned her new tastes, Emma." I don't know what to believe. I saw it then, just a flicker of something in her eyes, something fleeting. It was gone almost as soon as it appeared, but it was enough to make my heart race. She stepped back, pulling her hand away from my arm, and turned toward the sink again, her voice lower this time. "Greg, I don't know why you're making this into something bigger than it is. Sarah's just a friend, okay? I'm helping her out. That's all there is to it. I don't see why you're so fixated on it." Her response was flat, almost rehearsed, and that made everything in me feel like I was chasing after a ghost. "I just don't get it," I murmured, mostly to myself. "You're acting like you've known Sarah for years, but you've never said anything about her. Not once. Why?" Emma sighed, turning off the tap. She didn't look at me, didn't meet my gaze. "Greg, please. We've talked about this enough. I'm not going to explain myself anymore." There it was again, the dismissal, the coldness that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The Emma I knew would never shut me out like this. She would never act like something was off. But now I felt like a stranger in my own home, standing at the threshold of a truth I wasn't ready to see. I didn't say anything more. I just turned and walked toward the door. The weight of the conversation pressed heavily on my chest, the air thick with unspoken words. It felt suffocating, as if something was just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered. But I didn't have the strength to push it further right then. I needed space. I needed time. But as I stepped outside, my mind kept racing. What was really going on? Why had Emma been so secretive about Sarah? Why hadn't I noticed these things before? I couldn't just let it go. Not now. I had to find out the truth. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Emma's face. Calm, collected, but hiding something. The way she brushed off my questions made my blood boil. It was as if she thought I would just accept her explanation without question, as if I were the one in the wrong for not trusting her. But I couldn't let it go. Something about Sarah, about the mustard and figs, didn't sit right with me. I couldn't help myself. I had to look through her phone. It was a small thing, a slip-up I knew I would regret, but I felt like I had no choice. I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was imagining things. But I needed to know. I had to find some kind of proof, something to either reassure me or confirm the suspicion that was gnawing at my insides. The house was quiet, Emma still fast asleep in our bedroom. I slipped into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest as I picked up her phone from the counter. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. I knew it wasn't right, but the temptation was too great. I unlocked the phone, trying not to wake her, and opened her messages. At first, everything seemed normal. A few texts from her friends, reminders about work, messages to family, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I saw it, a message from Sarah. It was recent, sent just a few days ago. My breath caught in my throat as I read it. Sarah, I can't wait to see you tomorrow. We need to talk about everything. I miss you. My mind raced. We need to talk about everything? That didn't sound like a casual friendship. That sounded intimate, too intimate for just a friend. I kept reading. Emma, I miss you too. I've been thinking about you a lot. It's hard keeping this all a secret, but we'll figure it out. My blood ran cold. Keeping this all a secret? What were they keeping secret? My hands shook as I scrolled through more of the messages. There were more than I had ever expected. The texts were flirty, intimate, nothing like the messages Emma would send to a simple friend. Words like, I can't wait to hold you again, and you've been on my mind nonstop. Each one left me feeling more sick than the last. I wanted to stop. I wanted to put the phone down, to stop digging into something that was obviously tearing me apart. But I couldn't. I needed the truth, and the truth was staring me right in the face. I couldn't ignore it anymore. They weren't just friends. Emma and Sarah, they were more than friends. They were hiding something from me, something that had been going on for who knows how long, and I had been blind to it. The messages continued, each one more revealing than the last, until I came to one final message sent late the previous night. It was Sarah again. Sarah, I'm sorry I can't be there tonight. Greg is getting too suspicious, but soon we'll be able to be open about us. I promise. The words hit me like a slap to the face. Greg is getting too suspicious. She was talking about me, and Emma was playing along. My heart sank as I realized how deep this betrayal went. It wasn't just about mustard and figs anymore. This was about a secret life, a life that Emma had been keeping from me, one that involved Sarah in ways I couldn't even imagine. I sat there frozen, staring at the phone screen. The world around me seemed to blur. My mind raced as I tried to process everything. Had Emma been lying to me this whole time? Had I been so naive to believe that everything was normal? The kitchen felt smaller, the air thicker as the weight of the situation sank in. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but something held me back. I didn't know if I was ready for that yet. I needed more answers. I couldn't just walk into this confrontation without understanding the full extent of what was going on. I put the phone down gently, my hands still trembling. I stood up and paced around the kitchen, trying to collect my thoughts. How had I missed the signs? How had Emma kept this from me? She had been so careful, so controlled. But the more I thought about it, the more everything began to fall into place. The grocery list, the strange items, the way Emma had brushed off my questions, the secrecy surrounding Sarah. It had all been right there in front of me. I had just been too trusting, too caught up in the normalcy of our life to see it. I felt the anger rise in my chest, but it wasn't just anger at Emma anymore. It was anger at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I ignored the warning signs? I needed to know more. I couldn't just let this go. Not now. I couldn't stop thinking about the messages. Each word, each sentence seemed to echo in my mind. Greg is getting too suspicious. I repeated the phrase in my head over and over again, as if hearing it once would somehow make it clearer. But it only made my blood boil more. They had been hiding it all from me. Emma and Sarah, two people I trusted, keeping secrets, betraying me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. I couldn't sit still any longer. I had to confront Emma. I had to get the truth, no matter how painful it was. My hands were still shaking as I paced around the living room, trying to make sense of everything. The house felt cold, like a stranger's house. Everything about it felt wrong now. I had been living a lie, and now it was time to face it. I looked up at the clock. It was late afternoon. Emma would be home soon. I thought about what I'd say, how I'd approach her, but the words felt hollow. How could I even begin to explain what I had found? How could I ask the woman I loved? No, the woman I thought I knew, why she had been sneaking behind my back with Sarah. I knew there was no easy way to do this, but I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers. The door opened and Emma stepped inside, looking tired from her day at work. She gave me a small smile, a smile that seemed too forced, too practiced. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice soft. I stood up from the couch, my body rigid with tension. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every part of me wanted to shout, to demand the truth. But I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk," I said, my words coming out colder than I intended. "About Sarah." Emma's smile faltered, just for a moment, but she quickly recovered. She dropped her purse on the table and walked over to me, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Greg, I told you, there's nothing to worry about. Sarah is just a friend. I've already explained everything." But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed her to stop lying to me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out her phone, holding it out in front of her. Her eyes widened when she saw it, and her face paled. "What's this?" I asked quietly, my voice barely a whisper. "What's going on between you and Sarah?" Emma took a step back, her eyes darting to the phone in my hand. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. I could see her struggling to come up with an explanation, but there was nothing she could say to undo what I had already read. I stepped closer to her, feeling my chest tighten with the weight of the moment. "I know about the messages, Emma," I said, my voice steady now. "I know what you've been hiding, the mustard, the figs, the frozen meals. That was just the beginning, wasn't it? All these little lies piling up. And then I find this, the messages between you and Sarah, the way you two have been hiding your relationship from me. All these years, Emma, you've been hiding this from me." Emma looked at the floor, her shoulders slumping, and for a moment I thought she might say something to explain it all. But she remained silent. I could feel the walls she had built around herself, the distance she had put between us. It was like we were strangers now, and I had no idea how we had gotten here. "Why, Emma?" I asked, my voice breaking a little. "Why did you do this? Why didn't you just tell me? Why all the secrets?" She finally met my gaze, and the sadness in her eyes was almost unbearable. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want you to know, because I knew how much it would hurt you." I shook my head, the words stinging like acid. "But it's worse now. It's worse because you've lied to me. You've been living this double life behind my back, and I had no idea. You've made me feel like I'm crazy for questioning things, but it's all been right there, right under my nose. I never wanted to hurt you, Greg, she said again, her voice trembling now. I never meant for any of this to happen. But Sarah and we've been in love for a while. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to stop loving her. And I didn't want to lose you either. So I thought I could keep both of you in my life. I thought I could make it work. I stepped back, my chest tight with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I had heard the words, but they didn't make sense. How had I missed this? How had I not seen the signs, the changes in Emma, the way she had started distancing herself from me, from us? I don't know how to fix this, she said quietly, her voice breaking. I don't know how to make it right, Greg. I never meant for it to get this far. I stood there in silence, staring at her, the pain of the situation weighing heavily on me. There were no more words to say. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I could even look at her the same way anymore. After a long silence, I finally spoke, my voice low. I need time. I can't do this right now. I need space. Emma nodded, her face crumpling as she held back tears. I understand, she whispered. I turned and walked away, heading to the front door. I couldn't stay here, not with the weight of everything pressing down on me. I needed to get away, to clear my head, to figure out what my next step was. Emma had betrayed me. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted, had lied to me for so long, and now I had no idea how to move forward. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing through the empty house. I stood on the porch for a few moments, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. The weight of Emma's confession was pressing down on me like a physical force. I didn't know what to feel, anger, betrayal, sadness, or a mix of everything all at once. I couldn't think straight. I needed air. I needed space. My car was parked in the driveway, but I didn't feel like driving. Instead, I found myself walking aimlessly, my feet carrying me through the quiet streets. The world seemed distant, like I was in a fog, everything around me muted and unreal. How had everything come to this? How had I not seen it? I kept thinking back to all the little moments I had missed, the way Emma had been acting differently lately, the way she'd brushed off my questions, the strange grocery list. But I had ignored it all, choosing to believe everything was fine. I had trusted her, and that trust had been shattered in a matter of minutes. The thought of Sarah, her friend, kept haunting me. Emma had said they'd been in love for a while. How long had this been going on behind my back? And why hadn't I seen it? The mustard, the figs, the frozen meals, those had been the first clues, but I had let them slip by. I had convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. I should have trusted my instincts. I found myself walking to the park again, the place that had once been so full of promise. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it had only been a few years. Emma and I had spent so many afternoons here, talking about our dreams, our future, and now all of that felt like a lie, a facade that had crumbled before my eyes. I sat down on one of the benches, resting my elbows on my knees, my head in my hands. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something, but none of that would change what had already happened. The damage had been done. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I wasn't sure anymore. The weight of everything was too much to bear. I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living like this in this limbo, not knowing what was real and what wasn't. I needed to talk to Emma again. I needed closure, but I didn't know if I was ready to hear whatever else she had to say. Eventually, I stood up and walked back to the house. The streetlights were flickering on as the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. When I reached the front door, I hesitated, taking a deep breath before turning the knob. Emma was sitting on the couch when I walked in. She looked up at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. She had clearly been crying, her eyes red and puffy. But there was something else there, something that looked like regret, like she knew she had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Greg, she whispered, her voice hoarse, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, my hands clenched into fists by my sides. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it wasn't as sharp as before. It had dulled, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. I don't know what to say, I finally said, my voice breaking. How could you do this to me, Emma? How long has this been going on? How long have you been hiding this from me? Emma wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. It started a while ago, she admitted. A year, maybe more. It just, it just happened, Greg. And I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could keep it all together, keep the secret, but I couldn't. I love Sarah, but I love you too. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She loved Sarah, and she loved me. The betrayal, the double life, it was all so much to process. How could she love both of us? How could she keep living this lie, knowing it would destroy everything? I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said quietly. I don't know if I can trust you again. Emma's face crumpled. Please, Greg. I've made so many mistakes. I never wanted to hurt you. I just, I got lost in this, and now I don't know how to fix it. Please just give me a chance to make things right. I stared at her for a long moment, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just some horrible mistake, that we could fix things. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Emma had crossed a line that I wasn't sure we could come back from. I need time, I said finally, my voice distant. I can't deal with this right now. I don't know what I want anymore. Emma nodded, her shoulders sagging in defeat. I understand, she whispered, her voice small. Take all the time you need. I walked out of the room, not looking back, and retreated to the bedroom. The weight of everything crashed down on me as soon as I sat on the edge of the bed. The woman I had built my life with, the woman I trusted, had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Emma and I would ever be the same again. But for now, all I knew was that I needed space. I needed to figure out who I was without her, without Sarah, without this lie that had been building for so long. I lay back on the bed staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, utterly alone.